Hello there, you're watching All 24 News, World News program coming to you live from Algiers. Here are the top stories of today. Algerian President Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune addresses a message to the nation on the occasion of National Martyrs' Day. Also coming up, the 36th Summit of Heads of State and Government of the African Union convened on Saturday, and Algeria renews its readiness to contribute to the success of the Libyan National Reconciliation Path. Also ahead in our news, political leaders and diplomats gather in Germany to assess the European security situation marked by Russia's military operation in Ukraine. And the United States expresses its disappointment over the Zionist cabinet's decision to expand settlement activity on the occupied West Bank. Hello again and welcome to the program. First off in our news, Algerian President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, addressed on Friday a message to the nation on the occasion of National Martyrs' Day, in which he said that Algeria will continue to preserve its economic and social gains and consolidate the pillars of a modern state, stressing that loyalty to the martyrs is a sacred national union.
Loyalty to martyrs is a sacred national union that makes cohesion of Algeria's social fabric immune against those who are involved in attacks on the country and persist in their drift and violations, seeking to undermine the process we have started for a national sustainable development in a promising and new Algeria. Such behavior is meant to influence Algeria's positions and its interaction with its regional and international environment based on mutual interests with full respect of the principle of independence of states and the approach of equality. The most valuable gain inherited from our glorious revolution and brave martyrs is the unwavering commitment to the message of November, from which our people draws its ability to unveil the schemes of a shameful circle made up of a handful of henchmen, successors of the colonial disgrace, haunted by their constant hostility towards Algeria.
As a representative of President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, Algerian Prime Minister Mr. Ayman bin Abdurrahman arrived in Addis Ababa on Thursday evening to join the 36th African Union held on the 17th and 18th of February. The Prime Minister participated on Friday in the proceedings of the AU High-Level Commission on Libya, which was held ahead of the 36th Ordinary Session of the Heads of State and Government Summit. Bin Abdurrahman renewed Algeria's assertion of contributing to the success of the Libyan national reconciliation process in cooperation with the African Union.
أمام ترابط وتكامل أولويات المرحلة الراهنة بطبيعتها.
Given the priorities complementarity of the current context, we insist on the importance of dealing with the challenges concerning the unification of military and financial institutions in Libya. We're ready to contribute to the success of the national reconciliation process in Libya, in collaboration with the African Union, with the aim of finding common ground that strengthens the inner Libyan national union. This will restore Libya's place on the African and international scene.
مكانتها الطبيعية على الساحة الإفريقية والدولية.
And in the same context, the head of the Algerian government also renewed Algeria's rejection of any intervention logic by force by inviting all the components of the Libyan people to dialogue and reconciliation, while condemning the continued foreign interference in the internal affairs of Libya.
ما فتئت الجزائر تعرب وبشدة عن رفضها.
Algeria has never ceased to reiterate its rejection of the use of violence and calls for promoting dialogue and reconciliation between all the components of the Libyan people. Algeria also condemns foreign interference in the inner Libyan affairs and the involvement of a number of foreign parties in the violation of the arms import ban. In this context, we reiterate our call to foreign parties to respect the sovereignty of Libya and its decisions and the union of its territory. The long-lasting, comprehensive and final solution to the Libyan crisis can only be achieved through a process that reinforces the principle of the national ownership and protects Libyan sovereignty over all its territory and its unity.
Algerian Foreign Minister Mr. Mtala Amra met Secretary General of the United Nations Antonio Guterres at the end of his participation in the proceedings of the 42nd session of African Union Executive Council. UN Chief will participate in the opening of the African Union Summit on Saturday. On this occasion, the two parties reviewed issues related to cooperation between Algeria and the United Nations, specifically issues concerning peace and security. Still with Algerian Foreign Minister's activities, Mr. Mtala Amra held on Thursday talks with several of his counterparts on the sidelines of the proceedings of the 42nd session of the Executive Council of the African Union held at the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. The talks included, among others, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Namibia, the Foreign Ministers of Angola, Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania, and Somalia, in addition to the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Cote d'Ivoire and Niger. The 36th Summit of the African Union is being held in exceptional circumstances dominated by security and food crises. The political and economic instability of many countries in the continent makes African leaders face the challenge of activating African solutions and summoning the political will to win these bets. Here's Hassan Barkan with more.
The annual African Union Summit is being held in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, with deepening security and food crises likely to dominate the agenda. Armed conflict from West Africa's Sahel to the Horn of Africa in the east and the impacts of drought and floods have driven ever more Africans from their homes, with over 44 million people displaced in 2022. The summit will adopt a series of protocols aimed at accelerating for implementation of Africa's new free trade area, under which trading officially began in 2021. However, experts believe Africa is still far off from starting the trade due to various border disputes and the limited freedom of movement of people between African Union member states.
Our region's better placed than the African Union itself, but there should be that synergy and comparative advantage of the African Union and organizations and regional organizations like SADC or IGAD and ECOWAS. That is something that we also note in our crisis group report has to be sorted out, and there has to be greater cooperation.
In addition to the security situation worsening hunger in several regions, which has been driven by armed conflict and extreme weather, is also a major subject of discussion. African leaders will advocate also for permanent seats for the continent on the UN Security Council and among the G20 group of large economies. The leaders of the African Union face challenging tasks of neutralizing foreign solutions and activating an African roadmap to end crises. This will allow the continent to restore its assigned role and active voice in international institutions and enables it to contribute to drawing up international policies.
The African Continental Free Trade Agreement represents a major opportunity for African countries to boost growth, reduce poverty, and broaden economic inclusion. Leaders traveled to Addis Ababa for the annual African Union Summit in an attempt to transform the Blockbuster Pact into reality. Here's Marwa Blaiwer.
The African Continental Free Trade Area is widely seen as a crucial driver for economic growth, industrialization, and sustainable development in Africa. The AU aspires to accelerate the Free Trade Zone Agreement implementation, as well as to find a mechanism to overcome obstacles such as customs tariffs and borders opening, given the current modest figures of African trade exchanges. AFCFTA's plan is to boost intra-African trade by 60% by the year 2034 through eliminating almost all tariffs, creating an economic bloc of 1.3 billion people with a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion.
On the economic level, who is the investor who will immerse himself in the Sahara or in the Sahel region, given the current crisis? Therefore, integration must be strengthened at the political level first, so that mechanisms are created to help investors move to these areas.
African countries currently trade only about 15% of their goods and services with each other, in comparison with more than 65% with European countries. The full implementation of African Continental Free Trade Area would grant a major opportunity for African countries to bring 30 million people out of extreme poverty and to raise the incomes of 68 million others who live on less than $5.50 per day. It would also help usher in the kinds of deep reforms necessary to enhance long-term growth in African countries.
When we talk logistics, it is also at the heart of African concerns. When we talk about this matter, there is the issue of borders that must be taken into account. And for this, I am positive when it comes to the characteristic of the economic corridor that lies in the project of the Trans-Saharan Road.
Algeria's integration vision in Africa reflected through its national infrastructure and its sustained support to all initiatives in this direction. Algeria recalled that its action for the strengthening of economic corridors in the region is a part of the common effort to achieve the aspirations of the peoples as to this agreement. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement, billed as the biggest free trade accord in the world in terms of population, would be a huge step forward for Africa, demonstrating to the world that it is emerging as a leader on the global trade agenda.
The spokesperson for the UN Secretary General, Mr. Stéphane Dujarric, said during a daily press briefing that the UN Secretary General Personnel Envoy for Western Sahara, Staffan de Mistura, is still maintaining his mission to achieve an agreeable solution to the question of Western Sahara, in line with Security Council resolutions.
I can tell you that Staffan de Mistura, who, as you know, is the personal envoy of the Secretary General for Western Sahara, is continuing his engagement with all concerned to progress towards a just, realistically sustainable and mutually agreeable solution to the question of the Western Sahara, in line with relevant Security Council resolutions and with a view of his upcoming briefing to the Security Council in April. At the end of this week, Mr. de Mistura will be attending the Munich Security Conference, where he is planning to conduct further consultations in this regard on the margins of the events in Munich.
The Senegalese Interior Ministry said in a statement that the next presidential election will be held on February 25, 2024. The statement added that the date for the Senegalese presidential election was set by a presidential decree of February 16th. This comes as the African country faces tense political situation. The Transitional Military Council in Mali has expressed its willingness to implement the Peace and Reconciliation Agreement signed in Algiers in 2015 and stemming from the Algiers process. The Ministry of Reconciliation in Mali said ambassadors of the countries concerned with the mediation were received in the country in preparation for the implementation of what was stipulated in the agreement emanating from the Algiers process and which is aimed at solving the crisis besetting Mali. The European Parliament has voted by majority for Moroccans to be prevented from entering its headquarters until the end of the investigations by the Belgian authorities into the corruption case linking the Moroccan regime. The adopted resolution underlined the determination of the European Parliament to fully investigate corruption cases involving countries that seek to influence the European legislative institution. Political leaders, including military officers and diplomats, gathered in the German city of Munich on Friday to assess the European security situation marked by Russia's military operation in Ukraine. Here's Mohammed Khatil with more.
Representatives from 96 countries are set to discuss over the course of the next few days key issues related to defense in what is commonly called the Davos for Defense Conference, with a special focus on the war in Ukraine and Western policy towards Russia, according to the organizers.
Understanding is always a path to greater security, and I'm therefore very pleased to be able to participate today. There will be many talks, many bilateral talks, but also many other formats. I believe that the time are such that the Munich Security Conference is more important than ever. And that is why the talks here will certainly be of a high and great importance.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and French President Emmanuel Macron opened the Munich Security Conference. For his part, German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said that the Munich Security Conference has always been a place for understanding and dialogue, and that many bilateral talks will be held during this important gathering.
The message to partners is the one we have always committed to. We will achieve the 2% target, but we will also make every effort to go beyond it. Of course, this will still have to be agreed upon in the coalition, but it must be clear to everyone. We will not be able to fulfill the task that lies ahead of us with just under 2%, especially those that we have to learn anew, all together, all partners, namely alliance and national defense.
The German Defense Minister also stressed that the coalition and partners will endeavor to achieve the 2% target and even try to go beyond it. It's worth noting that 40 heads of state and government and nearly 100 ministers are participating in the Munich Security Conference. Russia will again be absent, with its leadership for the first time in 2 decades not being invited.
Still in Europe, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has stated that there is still more work to do in negotiating a deal with the European Union on the protocol governing Northern Ireland's post-Brexit trade arrangements. This comes after Sunak had positive discussions with political parties in Belfast.
Well, today I had positive conversations with political parties in Northern Ireland about our ongoing discussions to resolve the Northern Ireland Protocol. Now, it's clear that we need to find solutions to the practical problems that the protocol is causing families and businesses in Northern Ireland, as well as address the democratic deficit. Now, there's more work to do, and that's why my ministerial colleagues and I will continue talking to the European Union intensely to find solutions that protect the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and Northern Ireland's place in our single market.
The United States expressed its disappointment over the Zionist cabinet's decision to expand settlement activity on the occupied West Bank. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre stated that such activity undermines a two-state solution by creating facts on the ground. Meanwhile, Palestinian prisoners are resisting the repressive measures imposed by the extremist Itamar Ben-Gvir.
We are deeply dismayed by Israelis' announcement that they will advance thousands of new settlements and retroactively legalize 9 outposts in the West Bank that were until now illegal under Israeli law. The United States strongly opposes these unilateral measures, which exacerbates tensions, harm trust between the parties, and undermine the geographic viability of the two-state solution.
The death toll from the earthquake that struck southern Turkey and northern Syria on February 6 has risen to over 43,000. New survivors continue to be found in several Turkish states. For its part, the United Nations has launched an appeal to raise funds to support the Turkish government's efforts to contain the aftermath of the disaster. To the Russia-Ukraine file now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has praised the value of gas as a source of energy, stating that it has been and will remain highly valuable for a long time. He assured that Russia's natural gas giant Gazprom will prosper despite Western efforts to decrease its dominance.
Gas has been and will remain a highly valuable commodity for a long time, a real asset, demand for which will only rise. Over the previous 30 years, global gas consumption has almost doubled, and in the next 20 years, according to expert estimates, it will increase by at least another 20% and maybe more.
Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said on Friday that comments by U.S. Under Secretary of State Victoria Nuland about Washington supporting Ukrainian attacks on Crimea showed that the United States was involved in the conflict. Let's take a listen.
The United States incite the Kiev regime to further escalate and move the war over onto the territory of our country in this way. by direct strikes. This is what we warned about earlier and why we have been forced to start the special military operation.
To a different story now, the U.S. President Joe Biden said he expects to speak with China's President Xi Jinping about what the United States says was a Chinese spy balloon that the U.S. fighter jet shot down early this month. China's foreign ministry, meanwhile, on Friday, called on the United States to work with Beijing on the balloon incident. Nabil Khazini reports.
The last spectacle of a balloon flying over the US sky spoke volume about how little Washington and Beijing actually communicate. The incident added to many more that emphasized the importance of maintaining a good line of communication between the United States and China. This was realized by both sides, who now seem open to establish dialogue after US-China relations witnessed much bigger challenges that could escalate to a Cold War.
We seek competition, not conflict with China. We're not looking for a new Cold War. But I make no apologies, and we will compete. And we'll responsibly manage that competition so that it doesn't veer into conflict.
Communication breakdown between the two superpowers can be bad for diplomacy and for the economy. A second equally important principle beyond that is that Washington and Beijing should agree to work together on the challenges that face both sides. These challenges on a full range of economic, political and security issues, particularly on matters where there is deep disagreement, cannot be resolved single-handedly.
但考验的是美方对妥善管控危机
The US side should start by meeting China halfway to manage differences and properly handle this unexpected incident. The United States should avoid misunderstandings and miscalculations and promote a return to the healthy and stable development of China-US relations. On the matter of the call between the two leaders you mentioned, China has no information to provide.
For the moment, China and the United States are in a competitive downward spiral. New wounds in these relations may drastically cause damage to the two countries and probably to the rest of the world.
Local media in North Korea reported that Pyongyang has threatened to unleash unprecedented forceful and persistent response actions if Washington and Seoul carry out planned military exercises in the coming weeks. North Korea carried out a record number of missile launches last year, about 50, in many cases in response to joint maneuvers by Seoul and Washington and the deployment of strategic Pentagon assets on the peninsula. And finally, for more international news making headlines around the globe, here is the news in brief by Zahra Farjani.
Multiple explosions and gunfire were heard as armed men stormed a police station in the southern Pakistani city of Karachi on Friday, a venue of the country's largest cricket tournament, according to officials. The station houses officers of the city's most senior police said there could have been up to 30 police at the station at the time of the attack. 5 former Memphis police officers on Friday pleaded not guilty to second-degree murder and other charges stemming from last month's beating of Tyre Nichols, a black man whose death 3 days later stirred outrage and fresh calls for reform in the region. At least 18 people, including a child, were found dead in an abandoned truck near the Bulgarian capital Sofia on Friday, according to officials. The truck was transporting timber and carrying illegal migrants hidden in a compartment and was found near a village hidden in a compartment. 34 migrants, including 5 children, were rushed to the hospital in Sofia, with at least 10 in critical condition. Rio de Janeiro's iconic carnival was opened on Friday after a symbolic key to the city was handed over to King Mumu, a popular character known as the King of the Carnival and Lord of Misrule. The ceremony took place at the government palace, where Rio's mayor Eduardo Paes handed over a giant sparkling key to this year's King Mumu, Jefferson Mendes da Silva.
Well, that's it for me and the rest of the English team. For more, you can always visit our social media platforms. That's it. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.